Well, let's go ahead and get started. I think we'll probably expect just a few more, but we'll get started. Um, Again, type in any questions or any points of clarifications or any topics that we haven't covered yet that you'd like to see covered. Feel free to dump them in the chat, and I'm happy to work them into our conversation. If it's not this week, I'll make sure to bring some materials for next week just to make sure that you're getting everything that you're hoping to get from this program. Last week, if you remember, we talked a little bit about branding and we talked about color schemes and we talked about the 4 P's of marketing, right? So product, price, place, and promotion, right? And how we kind of use those pillars, if you will, of marketing to kind of position ourselves to get the word out and communicate with our customers and things like that. This week, we're going to jump into how do we identify your ideal customer. And this part's really critical, in my opinion, probably one of the most critical elements of running business, period. So, as I probably mentioned to you before, in my previous life, I was a banker and a finance guy. Used to review a lot of business plans, used to be the one to provide early stage capital to start up businesses and things like that back in the day when banks used to actually do loans for early stage businesses. But one of the things that was interesting to me, always probably a little bit frustrating to my clients and my customers when they'd come in, is they'd bring me these nice, long, lengthy business plans. And the business plans would typically be chocked full of financial projections, right? Or what we call pro formas in the as we're kind of trying to forecast out what we think our future sales will be, revenues, profits, those kinds of things in the business. And the customers would get frustrated with me because I would go into those business plans and I'd pull out those financials and I'd literally throw them in the trash can while they were in my office. And it wasn't intentional to try to offend them or be upsetting to them. But the reality of it is none of those financial information that they provided is really relevant to me from the banker standpoint, because I know in the end they just made them up, right? They worked really hard to try to be realistic and put some numbers together. But the reality is as a banker, I probably have access to more systems and subscription accounts where I could do better research than what they had available to them. But in the end, none of it matters if they can't tell me how they get customers, right? So getting customers is critical, but not just any customer. You'll hear me say this quite frequently, right? We don't want just any patient, if you will, or client in your practice or whatever it is that you're creating there, because some of those clients or those patients, those customers can be a burden to your business. And so some of the consulting that I've done to Fortune 500 type companies, after spending a week or two within the business and doing kind of some deep dive into some of their processes and their customer base and things like that, I would typically provide a list to the CEO, and the list would have a long list of names of customers on it. And the CEO would say, well, what's this for? And I said, these are customers that I want you to fire. I want you to exit them from your business. The CEOs were baffled. Why would I do that? That doesn't make sense. We worked really hard to get customers. Why would we ever tell customers to leave? And the reality of it is I say, because these customers are actually costing you money. So they take up more bandwidth. They frustrate your employees. They're needy. They constantly, have problems that are not things that are generating revenue for the business. And once the CEO kind of commits to that and they work up the courage to actually go through that process, they come back to me typically in about a month or two and they say, that was the best decision I ever made in my life. I don't know why it took us so long to figure that out. Employee morale is better within the organization. We can spend more time with the customers that are better aligned with our practice, and we're able to service them better. So I always say, let's start with the right customers in mind, right? And so again, from my banking days, I had this is a true story, and I like to tell this story just because it's a little bit comical, but it's true. It's truthful. So I had this young woman come in and she wanted to start a hair salon business. Great, no problem. Those are great businesses. They can be very profitable. hands me over the business plan. I start to thumb through it. I say, tell me about your ideal customer. And in all seriousness, she looks at me and says, anybody with hair. And right off the bat, I knew that they hadn't done their homework, right? So, as many of us probably know, how people like to get their hair done, if you will, or get their hair cut, whatever you want to call it, is very, very different across populations, right? Now, this is a little bit stereotypical, but I use the example of saying, typically most males, if it takes longer than 15 minutes and costs more than $15, they're probably not interested in getting their hair cut in some facility like that. And most females are often the opposite, right? If it doesn't cost me $200 and I'm not in the chair for 2 hours and I don't have a glass of wine in my hand while I'm there, then it's not the experience I'm looking for, right? As we know, those are two totally different types of salons. They're very different types of experiences for those customers. And we have to be able to kind of hone in and figure out what that experience is. So all of you are working in, private practice, or you have some type of health and wellness related focus that you want to do, and customers have a lot of options, right? Well, business owners have a lot of options too, as far as picking those right customers. And so I want us to be focused on making sure that you're aligned with the customers that are going to be a good cultural fit for your business and ultimately be profitable, right? So you've probably heard the statistic that it costs 7 times more money to acquire a new customer than it does to keep an existing customer. So if it costs you a lot of money to acquire a new customer, we want to make sure we're getting the right one and we're getting the ones that we're going to keep. So there's this little exercise I'm going to give you, and let me see how I'm going to do this here. I'm going to put this in here, and hopefully you can access it. But I'm also going to share my screen. So what we're doing here is we're going to go. This is a fun little exercise. We're going to actually have some in-class activity today. All right. So hopefully everybody can see my screen here. This is a little exercise that we call Instagram Mad Libs. Now it's geared towards how you're going to attract customers through social media. And many of you may or may not be using social media to attract customers, but this process works for any type of marketing approach that you're going to do. In the second half of our time together today, we're going to go through something called the IMC, so an integrated marketing communication plan, on how you're going to go out and reach customers. And so even if you're not doing social media, this practice will help you with this. Now, the one thing that we use this tool for is to really paint the picture of what we call the psychographic of our customer, right? Many of you, because of the expertise that you have in the field that you're in, are probably familiar with that term. A lot of businesses that I work with never heard that term psychographic, but most people are familiar with the term demographics, right? So we're talking about hard numbers, things that are very tangible, right? Where do people live in a certain geographic location? Are they male, female? Are they non-binary? Are they, in a certain income bracket? What kind of car they drive? These kinds of things. Those are very tangible kind of demographic data. And it's useful information. We know that we like to do that. You're going to set up a physical practice somewhere. Typically, we want to know a little bit about the demographics of a specific region or a specific area before we determine to put our practice there, right? Or once we're established there, we want some of that demographic information to understand, like who lives within a 1 mile radius, within a 3 mile radius, something along those lines. Well, as marketers, we really like to understand the psychographic makeup of the customers that we're going after. And the short and simple version of that is, what's the lifestyle choices that these individuals are making, and how can we align those potential customers to fit within our bucket. And so marketers use this term all the time, and they say, I don't care about where you live or, what your zip code is or any of that kind of stuff. What I want to know is what kind of beer is in your refrigerator. Okay. And it's not about the fact whether or not they drink beer or don't drink beer. But the point is if I'm asking you something specific like that, and we'll use the example of beer, are you drinking like a local craft microbrew beer, or do you have, Bud Light in your refrigerator? If you have Bud Light as an example, then I can probably already start to tell you what color your pickup truck is, what breed of dog that you have, etc. Right. So with these kind of psychographic details, we can start to paint a picture of what our customer, who that customer is, what they like, what they do, where can I find them? And that's really what we want with this exercise, is being able to find those customers that are the best fit for our organization. Now, you should have access to this in the chat. I want you to be able to open it up, and I want you to play with it. I'm going to give everybody about 15 minutes to work on this independently, and then I'm going to see if we can maybe get somebody to share, just so we can kind of talk through it a little bit. But if you can't fill out all the boxes, that's okay. We can talk through that after everybody's had a chance to kind of play with it. But this process works really, really well if you take the time to sit down and really understand your customer. Now, the reason why I like everybody to do this is because it's going to help you when we talk in the second half of the class about the marketing communication plan, basically building out your budget, right? And where we're gonna go to attract customers. And when I say budget, it doesn't mean that you have to spend money or a lot of money to go out and market, right? There's a lot of things that we can do, but I'm gonna walk you through that in the second half of today. But when I fill this document out as an example for my business, this is very true, right? So I can tell you exactly who my customer is. My ideal customer for my pet product business is a 35-year-old single working female. She's typically climbing the corporate ladder. She may or may not have a romantic partner in her life. Her dog is her best friend, and she spends her activity hiking and running. Okay. And I can walk into a room with 200 people that I've never met before, and I can start to point that person out in the crowd. And so from the perspective of marketing, if I'm going to spend dollars in this particular example, if I'm going to do it in social media, I can paint a picture on the back end of social media of who I want to see that ad, right? And then what that does is that helps me ensure that I'm going to have a higher conversion rate of getting the customer to actually take action, in this case, buy my product. That's what I want them to do, okay? Now, what I always say to customers is it's really important to do this because we want to be effective with our marketing spend. Most of us have very limited budgets as far as how we're going to go out and pursue and try to attract customers. Now, so I just painted a picture for you of the 35-year-old single working female. Great. That's where I want to spend my dollars because I know my conversion rate's going to be higher on that end. But if 45-year-old Bob wants to come over and buy my product because he saw it on somebody else's dog or he was referred by a friend, that's fantastic. I'm happy to sell that product to Bob. I just didn't have to pay money to acquire him as a customer. Okay. So one of the things that, in the terminology, as far as entrepreneurship world goes, or business ownership goes, if you're looking, say, down the road to try to attract some outside investment capital or have investors in your business or have partners, as an example, they might ask you, what's the customer acquisition cost, right? So that's a term that's very frequently used. And the short version is how much does it cost you to get a new customer, right? How much money are you spending in advertising? How much money are you, paying a salesperson to go out and knock on doors? Whatever approach is, and we'll talk a little bit more about that again in the second half. But this will help you kind of clarify that, right? And why it makes a difference is because you want to be able to understand, again, the cost to create the products and the services that you do, and how that equates to revenue. So if you remember a few weeks ago, we started talking about break-even analysis. We talked about some of the finances and things like that. And I always use physical products as examples in these classes because they're super tangible and it's easy for people to understand. But service-related businesses are no different, right? But to put it into perspective with a physical product, my business model is such that it's a direct-to-consumer model. my whole sales channel, my primary sales channel is selling direct to consumer through my website. My customer acquisition cost is $7 a customer currently, right? And that's through social media ads and things like that. So on average, for every customer that I get that pays for my product, it costs $7. Now, does that sound high? Well, it's all relative to the industry and products and things like that. But to put it into perspective, if I'm selling into big box business, right? PetSmart or Target or Walmart or someplace like that, they're only going to pay me 50% of what my product cost. So a customer acquisition cost in that model would be $40 a unit, which is not better than $7 a unit, right? So, okay, let's see. Okay, great. Thanks. And Sarah's going to take a stab at it. I appreciate it. Okay, so I'm going to leave you to this for about 10 to 15 minutes. I want you to go through the exercise. If maybe you can fill it in on your computer or wherever you're at, or maybe you can just take a few notes. And then when we come back here in about 10 to 15 minutes, it looks like Sarah maybe is going to volunteer for us, and we'll have Sarah go first, and we'll just kind of talk through it a little bit. Okay. So I'm going to pause, and I'll be here if anybody has questions in the chat. I'm going to stop sharing for the moment, but yeah, just work on this for about 10 to 15 minutes. Okay. Yes, Margaret, it's a good question in the chat there. Is it okay to have more than one ideal customer? And the answer is yes. Oftentimes, it also depends on the type of business that you have. But I really like us to focus on the primary customer base, right? And a little bit of this might change as we get into as you get into the marketing budget strategy piece we're going to talk about next. And also where I see it a little bit different when we have different ideal customers is for nonprofits, as an example. And so a lot of times nonprofits, when you ask them who their ideal customer is, they will always tell you about the clientele that they service, right? We offer all these amazing programs and we work with youth in this area. And, this is what the kids normally look like. Well, my argument to them is that that's not their customer. That's who they service, and that's fine, right? And those individuals are getting the benefit of the work that the nonprofit is doing. But from a nonprofit perspective, their customer is their donor base, right? Because from a revenue standpoint for a nonprofit, they have to bring in dollars, typically from grants and private donors. And so they have to align their strategy towards those donors, not to the community that they're servicing. So that's sometimes where it's a little bit different. Okay. Let's, if you haven't finished, that's okay. We can keep working through it. And I'm here, remember, outside of the class too. If you want to ping me, if you want to send this over to me as a draft, fine to chat through it with you. But I'm going to ask Sarah to take it away.
Hello.
Sarah, tell us real briefly, just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about the business that you want to create.
My name is Sarah Stewart. I'm an end-of-life doula here in Denver. I'm a member of the Colorado Collaborative of End-of-Life Doulas, and I'm considering a relocation.
Okay.
I purchased some land in North Carolina outside Fort Bragg and Pope Air Force Base, and wanting to put a wellness center as a part of the business on that land.
Okay. Fantastic.
So my client name is Jeff. Jeff is Middle America, and he is either retired military or an active duty member. And he is over the age of 27, and he has a wife and 2 kids. And when he wakes up in the morning, he's anxious about his pain and overall anxiety. As he heads out the door for his day, if his job is still in the military, he's concerned about his performance in the military. or if he is medically retired, he has angst over the fact that he can't do the same duties as he's done in the past. Let me see. I'm trying to figure out where I am here. Okay, and he wants to describe himself as productive, active, and successful. After work, um, he's usually off to sitting with his friends and family. He's restless, he feels useless, and in the evening, he's not really into social media, but sometimes he looks at things related to the military or outdoors, fishing, hunting, those sorts of things.
Okay.
So, as far as brands, that's what I'm going to have to explore because it's not anything that I have any knowledge in.
Okay.
And when they climb into bed, he wants to dream about being more active and more engaged with his family and also showing more affection to his wife and kids and just being an overall more productive member of society.
Okay.
And to his wife is this right. Not too much into social media. Um, looks at things that his wife talks about. You know, she's pushing him along to go after the dreams that he's had, even though his life has changed.
Okay. Great.
Uh, that's pretty much it.
Great. Okay. Fantastic job, Sarah. Thanks for volunteering. I appreciate it.
Mhm.
So, just out of curiosity, so the wellness center that you want that you're considering in North Carolina is that just end of life wellness, or is are we talking all health and wellness?
All health and wellness because in 2015, before I hit 50, I survived a stroke.
Okay.
So I have that personal knowledge, and part of my recovery was becoming a certified yoga and meditation instructor.
Okay.
So here in Denver, I've held uh, ongoing weekly classes before the pandemic with senior citizens and people that have limited mobility.
Okay.
So being able to take that and um, there in Fayetteville, there's a military hospital and work also with those populations, you know, at other facilities other than on my own land, but being able to use mindfulness and adaptive yoga to
Perfect.
be able to help people basically regain their life.
Okay. Great. Love it. Thank you. And then, out of curiosity, how come we picked a military background for your
Just
customer?
because in that area, there's so many military members. The town where my land is
Okay.
like 10 minutes from Fort Bragg.
Okay. Great. Okay. So you know that there's a high concentration of that population there.
Correct. And the Air Force Base is right up the road.
Okay. Good. And there was a lot in what you wrote in the responses here, right? As far as like the fear and anxiety and kind of work performance, and kind of living true to that, what was probably typically ingrained in most people that went through the military, right? Of, upholding a certain standard and that kind of stuff. So that part was pretty clear there. As also that, with that kind of meat of that, if you will, that also helps in your communication strategy, right? When you think about potentially reaching out to them, advertising to them, or marketing in that space, if you're using wording that's aligned to that, would help them in that space. And while you mentioned here that your ideal client's probably not actively involved in social media, that's perfectly fine. Where are they gaining their news information from? Right, local newspapers, print magazine publications, typically, different things like that. So those would be things that you want to consider, right? So while I don't think you had answers in there necessarily for brands or publications, really kind of pause for a minute and think about that as far as what what types of brands and things are they, oftentimes you find maybe say military personnel are big into hunting and fishing, right? As an example.
Right.
And so, are they reading Outdoor Magazine? Are they reading, Fishing Monthly? Whatever those publications are. Are they, pretty actively, are they the type when they pick up the newspaper, the first section they flip to is the sports section, or is it the finance section, or something like that? So we want to, start to think about those things, because if we're going to spend money, or try to go to an event or something to promote our business and our services, we want to go to the types of events where these customers will be, right? We want to place ads in magazines where these customers will be, right? And I joke about this all the time, because I used to be somebody until just about a month and a half ago. I used to be somebody who also fit into this category, but we're here in Colorado, right? And I always used to joke to say that the state car of Colorado is a Subaru, right? I
Yes.
drive a Subaru. And
Or Toyota, one or
right.
the other.
Well, it's so funny thing is I sold my Subaru and I bought a Toyota. So, right. So we all fit into the same bucket, but we can also say, well, okay, so I'm driving the Subaru. I'm typically probably camping on the weekends. I'm probably, shopping at REI on a fairly regular basis. I probably, start to participate in certain types of activities. I probably shop at these grocery store chains, et cetera.
Right.
And that's really helping us kind of paint the picture of where our customer is and where we can find them, right? So when we talk about the IMC chart here in just a little bit, one of the categories in there as an example will be events, right? Some of you may choose to do events, but not necessarily, right? But for me, again, I sell a physical product. Events were good for me in the very beginning. And if I go to an event that's very specific to pet owners, I have a lot of success, right? If I go to an event that has more of a general population that's not necessarily going to the events, planning to experience pet products, my sales are not as good. And so this is part of the reason why we go through this exercise, so we can do that. I know I got some good chats here, so let's see what's going on.
It's interesting though that you just at the beginning of this mentioned the nonprofit being the customer if I'm nonprofit, and community is who's servicing if I'm a nonprofit, because I thought of becoming a nonprofit. I'm also ordained. And there in the South, when we went to look around to buy land, that the South is big on churches and pastors and all that. So I've it's not been something that I've promoted here in Colorado because people really don't care. But
Well,
it
y-
it helps in the death industry that I'm ordained. But in the wellness piece out there, it might help just because people revere religion so much.
sure. Yeah, that's a good example, right? Because again, it's probably still has more roots there in that community, and so that makes good sense for that. And with the type of business that you're creating as well, Sarah, you could potentially have a for-profit arm and a nonprofit arm, right? This
Hmm.
is very common. In fact, almost on a daily basis, I'm now coaching businesses to do that, because they're providing some pretty amazing services, right? And what I like about having a for-profit arm and a nonprofit arm is it allows you to maximize kind of different revenue streams. So, because of the kind of work that you're doing, and potentially maybe you're working with a population that maybe doesn't have a lot of disposable income, and things of that nature, and maybe the services aren't necessarily provided or covered under insurance, the nonprofit arm would allow you to raise donations and grants and different things. And there's a lot of opportunities out there to do that. And then that nonprofit arm can, generate money and basically provide scholarships for the patients that you want to see in the wellness
Right.
space, right? And so they just basically pay the for-profit arm a consulting fee, and then that way you can service a population that's important to you, and wants that would really benefit from the services but maybe couldn't afford it. And so it's a way for you to create more flexibility in the space. So you might want to consider that when you get there.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
Thank you.
thank you again for sharing. So Charlie, if you're able to unmute yourself, I'd love to chat through your concerns here. So, um, Charlie says that they've been working for decades, working with clients, and you have an agency that basically passes the referrals on to you. And so the first question I would have for you, Charlie, in regards to that is, of all the clients that you see, I'm assuming that there's probably ones that definitely feel like they're a better fit for you than others. Is that correct?
Yes, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. Thank
Oh,
you.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for addressing my question. When I printed off the Insta marketing Mad Lib and started to fill it out, and I was like, uh, I just felt like I don't know the answers to these. I don't know who my ideal client is, and then I realized I just haven't ever thought of this before. I just have to put time into it.
Yeah.
And so that would be a good way to start. Like, who have I enjoyed working with the most over the years, right? That's what you're asking me.
Yeah. And then, Charlie, just kind of a high level overview. Tell me a little bit about the work that you're doing currently and patients.
So I'm a licensed clinical social worker, do grief counseling for a hospice. So and would like to move into a private practice psychotherapy, and probably my niche would be people with a recent death loss in their life who are working through grief.
Okay.
I've just been doing it for so long. I think it's just probably my natural niche. And so,
Okay. And that's why you have this wide age range down here, this 14 to 84, because you currently see clients that are in that age range.
I actually, I don't tend to see teenagers. I see mostly adults, but I enjoy working with teenagers. So I would want to explore that question more.
Okay. Good. And this then kind of brings us back to an earlier question from Margaret, right? Is could you have multiple ideal customers?
Uh-huh.
And the answer, as I was kind of saying, is yes, you can. But the trick would be for me, what I'd like to see is because if you had an age range, say as an example, from 14 to 84, our marketing approach would be very different, obviously, to let's say a 14 to 18-year-old versus a 64 to 80-year-old, right?
Mhm.
And that it's just how we reach out to them and how we approach them. From a business operations standpoint, I would want to understand, like your revenue model with that customer base, with how your time is spent with them. Is your methodology different, right? As far as how you engage with that clientele, different based on that age range. Those are all kind of pieces that we would want to work into our overall approach.
Mhm.
The biggest thing that I would want everybody on this call to address is making sure that you're getting customers that are benefiting you and the business, right? So first and foremost, are we getting paid for the work that we're doing? Maybe there's some of us on the call who have the ability to not necessarily worry about money, as an example, and we have the ability to give time away for free or whatever the case is. But in most cases, I'm assuming that's not really the case, right? And so we want to make sure that we're working with clients that are able to help sustain the business itself, because you don't want to always be in a constant position of struggle as a business owner. Then the second piece would be, for me, like your techniques, again, your approach, Charlie, as an example, I'm assuming would be a little bit different towards the younger population versus adult population and those kinds of things. And so this exercise would help you a little bit with that. That makes sense.
Absolutely. Yeah, this is perfect. I
Yeah.
need to do this contemplation. I just realized I'm just at the very beginning of it, I think.
Okay. And that's, so again, this is geared towards, if you're going to use social media, but we can tweak it to consider other directions, right? And also, Charlie, I work with a lot of therapists, as I mentioned, and some of those therapists, as an example, they work with older populations, right? And so, like, I'm assuming if you're dealing with an 84-year-old and maybe they just recently lost a spouse, right? And sometimes from a marketing approach, we're not really marketing to that 84-year-old, spouse, the surviving spouse. We're actually working with their children, right? Who are going to help basically persuade them to come seek services and the support that they need to do that.
Hmm.
So, so that's something you have to kind of consider in this approach as well. So if let's just like get really focused and we're saying, hey, we're only working with surviving spouses, that in itself might be a potential marketing approach. But just from my experience of working with other clinicians that work in this space, they find more traction working with the children. So that's so you would have to approach that from that standpoint if that was true in your world as well. And probably with 14-year-olds too, right? I mean, you're not typically getting them convinced, you're getting their parents convinced, right?
Yep. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. Good. So does that help a little bit?
Yeah, it does. It does. Thank you.
Okay, sure. All right. Any other questions that people want to type in the chat, and we need to free people up to talk? We certainly can do that. Okay. Well, again, feel free to type questions in there if something comes up while we're moving through the class here, and then please feel free to reach out to me directly as well if you'd like to talk more specifically about stuff that you're working on and this tool is helpful for you. Okay, so with that, I'm going to pause to everybody take a break from me for a little bit. I'm going to play a fun video, and then we'll jump into the IMC piece. So let's see. Yeah, great, Marie. So again, I'm happy to help, Marie, if you'd like to connect outside of class as well. All right. Many of you may have seen this, but it's still a really fun one. So it'll lighten the mood a little bit.
When I was 7 years old and my sister was just 5 years old, we were playing on top of a bunk bed. I was 2 years older than my sister at the time. I mean, I'm 2 years older than her now, but at the time that meant she had to do everything that I wanted to do, and I wanted to play war. So we were up on top of our bunk beds, and on one side of the bunk bed, I had put out all my G.I. Joe soldiers and weaponry, and on the other side were all my sister's Milos and ponies and ready for a cavalry charge. There are differing accounts of what actually happened that afternoon, but since my sister is not here with us today, let me tell you the true story. Which is my sister is a little bit on the clumsy side. And somehow, without any help or push from her older brother at all, suddenly Amy disappeared off the top of the bunk bed and landed with this crash on the floor. And I nervously peered over the side of the bed to see what had befallen my fallen sister and saw that she had landed painfully on her hands and knees on all fours on the ground. I was nervous because my parents had charged me with making sure that my sister and I played as safely and as quietly as possible. And seeing as how I had accidentally broken Amy's arm just 1 week before, heroically pushing her out of the way of an oncoming imaginary sniper bullet, for which I have yet to be thanked. I was trying as hard as I could. She didn't even see it coming. I was trying as hard as I could to be on my best behavior, and I saw my sister's face this wail of pain and suffering and surprise, threatening to erupt from her mouth and threatening to wake my parents from the long winter's nap for which they had settled. So I did the only thing my little frantic 7-year-old brain could think to do to avert this tragedy. If you have children, you've seen this hundreds of times before. I said, Amy, wait, don't cry, don't cry. Did you see how you landed? No human lands on all fours like that. Amy, I think this means you're a unicorn. Now that was cheating because there's nothing in the world my sister would want more than not to be Amy, the hurt 5-year-old little sister, but Amy, the special unicorn. Of course, this was an option that was open to her brain at no point in the past. And you could see on my poor, manipulated sister's face conflict. As her little brain attempted to devote resources to feeling the pain and suffering surprise she just experienced, or contemplating her newfound identity as a unicorn. And the latter won out. Instead of crying, instead of ceasing our play, instead of waking my parents with all the negative consequences that would have ensued for me, instead, a smile spread across her face, and she scrambled right back up onto the bunk bed with all the grace of a baby unicorn. With one broken leg. What we stumbled across At this tender age of just 5 and 7, we had no idea at the time was something that was going to be at the vanguard of a scientific revolution occurring 2 decades later in the way that we look at the human brain. What we had stumbled across is something called positive psychology, which is the reason that I'm here today and the reason that I wake up every morning. When I first started talking about this research outside of academia, out with companies and schools, the very first thing they said to never do is to start your talk with a graph. The very first thing I wanted to do is start my talk with a graph. This graph looks boring, but this graph is the reason that I get excited and wake up every morning. And this graph doesn't even mean anything. It's fake data. What we found is if I got this data back sitting you here in the room, I would be thrilled because there's very clearly a trend that's going on there, and that means that I can get published, which is all that really matters. The fact that there's one weird red dot that's up above the curve, there's one weird in the room, you know who you are. I saw you earlier. That's no problem. That's no problem, as most of you know, because I can just delete that dot. I can delete that dot because that's clearly a measurement error. And we know that's a measurement error because it's messing up my data. So one of the very first things that we teach people in economics and statistics and business and psychology courses is how, in a statistically valid way, do we eliminate the weirdos? How do we eliminate the outliers? So that we can find the line of best fit, which is fantastic if I'm trying to find out how many Advil the average person should be taking, too. But if I'm interested in potential, if I'm interested in your potential or for happiness or productivity or energy or creativity, what we're doing is we're creating the cult of the average with science. If I ask a question like how fast can a child learn how to read in a classroom, scientists change the answer to how fast does the average child learn how to read in that classroom? And then we tailor the class right towards the average. Now, if you fall below the average on this curve, then psychologists get thrilled because that means you're either depressed or you have disorder or hopefully both. We're hoping for both because our business model is if you come into a therapy session with one problem, we want to make sure you leave knowing you have 10. So you'll keep coming back over and over again. We'll go back into your childhood if necessary, but eventually what we want to do is to make you normal again. But normal is merely average. And what I posit and what positive psychology posits is that if we study what is merely average, we will remain merely average. Then instead of deleting those positive outliers, what I usually do is come into a population like this one and says, why? Why is it that some of you are so high above the curve in terms of your intellectual ability, athletic ability, musical ability, creativity, energy levels, your resiliency in the face of challenge, your sense of humor? Whatever it is, instead of deleting you, what I want to do is study you. Because maybe we can glean information, not just how to move people up to the average, but how we can move the entire average up at our companies and schools worldwide. The reason this graph is important to me is when I turn on the news, it seems like the majority of the information is not positive. In fact, it's negative. Most of it's about murder, corruption, diseases, natural disasters. And very quickly, my brain starts to think that's the accurate ratio of negative to positive in the world. What that's doing is creating something called the medical school syndrome, which if you know people who have been to medical school during the first year of medical training, as you read through a list of all the symptoms and diseases that could happen, suddenly you realize you have all of them. I have a brother-in-law named Bobo, which is a whole nother story. Bobo married Amy the unicorn. Bobo called me on the phone from Yale Medical School. And Bobo said, Sean, I have leprosy. Which even at Yale is extraordinarily rare. But I had no idea how to console poor Bobo because he had just gotten over an entire week of menopause. See, what we're finding is not necessarily the reality that shapes us, but the lens through which your brain views the world that shapes your reality. If we can change the lens, not only can we change your happiness, we can change every single educational and business outcome at the same time. When I applied to Harvard, I applied on a dare. I didn't expect to get in, and my family had no money for college. When I got a military scholarship 2 weeks later, they allowed me to go. Suddenly, something that wasn't even a possibility became a reality. When I went there, I assumed everyone else would see it as a privilege as well, that they'd be excited to be there. Even if you're in a classroom full of people smarter than you, you'd be happy just to be in that classroom, which is what I felt. But what I found there is while some people experienced that, when I graduated after my 4 years and then spent the next 8 years living in the dorms with the students, Harvard asked me to. Wasn't that guy. But what happened, I was an officer of Harvard to counsel students through the difficult 4 years. And what I found in my research, my teaching, is that these students, no matter how happy they were with their original success of getting into the school, 2 weeks later, their brains were focused not on the privilege of being there, nor on their philosophy or their physics. Their brain was focused on the competition, the workload, the hassles, the stresses, the complaints. When I first went in there, I walked into the freshman dining hall, which is where my friends from Waco, Texas, which is where I grew up. I know some of you have heard of it. When they come to visit me, they look around, they say, this freshman dining hall looks like something out of Hogwarts from the movie Harry Potter, which it does. This is Hogwarts from the movie Harry Potter, and that's Harvard. And when they see this, they say, Sean, why do you waste your time studying happiness at Harvard? Seriously, what does a Harvard student possibly have to be unhappy about? Embedded within that question is the key to understanding the science of happiness, because what that question assumes is that our external world is predictive of our happiness levels, when in reality, if I know everything about your external world, I can only predict 10% of your long-term happiness. 90% of your long-term happiness is predicted not by the external world, but by the way your brain processes the world. And if we change it, if we change our formula for happiness and success, what we can do is change the way that we can then affect reality. What we found is that only 25% of job successes are predicted by IQ. 75% of job successes are predicted by your optimism levels, your social support, and your ability to see stress as a challenge instead of as a threat. I talked to a boarding school up in New England, probably the most prestigious boarding school, and they said, we already know that. So every year, instead of just teaching our students, we also have a wellness week, and we're so excited. Monday night, we have the world's leading expert coming in to speak about adolescent depression. Tuesday night is school violence and bullying. Wednesday night's eating disorders. Thursday night is illicit drug use. And Friday night, we're trying to decide between risky sex or happiness. I said, that's most people's Friday nights. Which I'm glad you liked, but they did not like that at all. Silence on the phone. And into the silence, I said, I'd be happy to speak at your school, but just, that's not a wellness week. That's a sickness week. What you've done is you've outlined all the negative things that can happen, but not talked about the positive. The absence of disease is not health. Here's how we get to health. We need to reverse the formula for happiness and success. In the past 3 years, I've traveled to 45 different countries, working with schools and companies in the midst of an economic downturn. And what I found is that most companies and schools follow a formula for success, which is this: if I work harder, I'll be more successful. And if I'm more successful, then I'll be happier. That undergirds most of our parenting styles, our managing styles, the way that we motivate our behavior. And the problem is it's scientifically broken and backwards for two reasons. First, every time your brain has a success, you just change the goalpost of what success looked like. You got good grades, now you have to get better grades. You got into a good school, now you have to get a better school. You got a good job, now you have to get a better job. You hit your sales target, we're going to change your sales target. And if happiness is on the opposite side of success, your brain never gets there. What we've done is we've pushed happiness over the cognitive horizon as a society. And that's because we think we have to be successful, then we'll be happier. But the real problem is our brains work in the opposite order. If you can raise somebody's level of positivity in the present, then their brain experiences what we now call a happiness advantage, which is your brain at positive performs significantly better than it does at negative, neutral, or stressed. Your intelligence rises, your creativity rises, your energy levels rise. In fact, what we found is that every single business outcome improves. Your brain at positive is 31% more productive than your brain at negative, neutral, or stress. You're 37% better at sales. Doctors are 19% faster, more accurate at coming up with the correct diagnosis when positive instead of negative, neutral, or stress, which means we can reverse the formula. If we can find a way of becoming positive in the present, then our brains work even more successfully as we're able to work harder, faster, and more intelligently. What we need to be able to do is reverse this formula so we can start to see what our brains are actually capable of. Because dopamine, which floods into your system when you're positive, has two functions. Not only does it make you happier, it turns on all the learning centers in your brain, allowing you to adapt to the world in a different way. We found that there are ways that you can train your brain to be able to become more positive. In just a 2-minute span of time, done for 21 days in a row, we can actually rewire your brain, allowing your brain to actually work more optimistically and more successfully. We've done these things in research now in every single company that I've worked with, getting them to write down 3 new things that they're grateful for 21 days in a row, 3 new things each day. And at the end of that, their brain starts to retain a pattern of scanning the world, not for the negative, but for the positive first. Journaling about one positive experience you've had over the past 24 hours allows your brain to relive it. Exercise teaches your brain your behavior matters. We find that meditation allows your brain to get over the cultural ADHD that we've been creating by trying to do multiple tasks at once. It allows our brains to focus on the task at hand. And finally, random acts of kindness or conscious acts of kindness. We get people when they open up their inbox to write one positive email, praising or thanking somebody in their social support network. And by doing these activities and by training your brain, just like we train our bodies, what we found is we can reverse the formula for happiness and success. And in doing so, not only create ripples of positivity, but create a real revolution. Thank you very much.
The 3 things, Marie, I'm actually the slide that he talked about on there and how you can go about making those positive changes over that 21 days. I actually have that slide and I'm going to share it with you in your drive. So pretty good stuff. I like sharing it. Everybody, yeah, thanks for chiming in. I like sharing this video with entrepreneurship class. It's kind of fun since most of you are focused on health and wellness. Anyway, but I like sharing it in entrepreneurship class because running a business is hard, right? And it's hard to stay very positive sometimes when you face some of the challenges associated with creating business. So we have big visions, right? Like Sarah talked about this great facility in North Carolina, and it's going to be great, right? I have no doubt it's going to be great, Sarah. It's just going to take a lot more work to get there than most of us typically anticipate. And staying positive throughout that, I think, is really important. So, so that's why I share this video. Again, I'll share the link. I'll share the slide where he talks about the steps and the things that we should kind of take into consideration when you're doing that. I personally have practiced it, and I think it works brilliantly. So it's good. It is a little bit scary, Sarah, I understand, but I'm always here to help too. So even when you move to North Carolina, feel free to ping me. I'm happy to be a coach or a mentor for you in that process. So it's going to be good. Okay, so with that, I'm going to move ahead and I'm going to share my last little template with you here. All right. This is super simple to use, but I'm going to take some time really to dive into this just so you can kind of understand how to use it. So this is something that's used from small marketing firms to the largest marketing firms in the world use this approach on a fairly regular basis, right? So it's something called Integrated Marketing Communication Plan, or you might hear it called IMC, right? Just the acronym IMC. And the whole concept behind this is kind of twofold. So what we're trying to do with this tool is really make sure that our strategy and our approach is aligned, right? So if we're going to use multiple channels to market and to do outreach to try to find customers, that all those different channels are integrated in the communication itself. So you might see things, as an example, from large firms where, excuse me, large firms, as an example, maybe you see billboard ads and you see television commercials and you hear radio ads and you see print ads on, bus wraps or whatever, right? All those images and the content is slightly different, but the messaging behind it is the same, right? So we want to see it kind of driven back towards whatever the intended purpose is. The other thing that this tool does for you is it helps you plan and build out your budget, which is important because especially for a group like this, our budgets are different, right? Some people might have $200 to spend on marketing and some people might have $200,000 to spend on marketing. This tool works for any of those budgets, right? The other thing that it does, and this is the most critical aspect of it, is it helps you stay focused on monitoring which methods are working. Because oftentimes, we put stuff out there in the ether and then we don't pay attention to it, or we don't have a good mechanism in place to understand if it's actually working. Okay. So I'm going to walk you through how to use this tool, and then we're going to go through a couple of examples. I'll put this tool in your drive. It's an Excel document, so you're encouraged to get in there and play with it, throw some numbers in there, those kinds of things. Again, any of these tools, if you want to make the effort to fill any of this stuff out, feel free to shoot it over to me. I'm happy to give you feedback for it. Okay. So let's just kind of walk through the tool itself and how you use it, and then we'll do some examples, right? So from on the top here, really what we're looking at is this: what's the plan or the channel, right? Your marketing channel. So in this column here, you can update these categories. You can leave entire rows blank. You don't have to use them, but most of us will not be doing broadcast television, right? These are TV commercials and things like that, because they're very, very expensive to do. And they're not as effective as they once were because of streaming services and DVRs at home and those kinds of things. And people are not watching television commercials like they used to. So most of us won't do that. So you can simply replace that category and call it something else, or you can just leave that entire row blank. Totally fine. Social media, most of us are familiar with it, even if we're not using it. I would encourage you to consider ways that you could be creative to use it, even if you feel like it's not right for your audience. And I'll talk through some examples on that in a little bit, because we're going to use that one as our example today. Direct marketing could be things like reaching out to customers via an email distribution list, sending something directly to them in the mail, direct mail, right? So many of us have done mailers, door hangers, literally littering the parking lot of cars and putting flyers on cars and parking lots, those kinds of things. So those might be examples there. Newspaper is still an option. Billboard ads, again, not typically something that I would see most of us doing here. Billboards are ridiculously expensive. You wouldn't think so, but they're very, very expensive. So this is a true story. So when I was at the university here in Denver, out of curiosity, I called. So Lamar and Nielsen are kind of the two biggest owners of billboards around the country. And you can just call them up and say, I'm interested in advertising on a billboard at this particular location. And they'll give you all kinds of data, how many cars drive by it every day, what the exposure rates are, et cetera. And the prices vary based on that traffic flow. And so I had this university campus there next to some train tracks. I had this semi-tractor trailer that was that I converted to a welding lab, a mobile welding lab for my students there, and it sat right on the train tracks. So I was going to sell some ad space on the side of the trucks to generate some revenue for the school, for the foundation for the school that provides scholarships. And so I called up the to get the pricing for the billboard that sits on I-25 at Colfax. And normally I'd take guesses here at this stage, but since we're kind of in this virtual format, I will just tell you that the cost to place a billboard ad on that billboard is $30,000 a month. And you're typically tied to a minimum of a 3-month commitment to do that. So very costly, not super effective. Billboards are also very difficult to track. Customer traction, like you might get sales from it, or you might get interest or people driving to your website as an example, but you won't necessarily know that they came from that billboard ad. So something that just to kind of keep in mind there a little bit. Sponsorships can be things like maybe you're a sponsor of a conference, right? Many of you probably attend, continuing education conferences and things like that. And maybe you want to have a sponsorship there, and it's name recognition into an audience, a group of people that are your peers or potential customers, those kinds of things. They could be things like hanging a banner at the back of the Little League softball field, because you're providing a service that's good for families, as an example. So that's kind of how to think about sponsorships. Digital is different than social media, just to kind of clarify. Digital is typically if you're on a website, as an example, and you see those pop-up banners, ads that kind of sometimes get annoying because they're getting in the way of the content that you're trying to read on the website or something like that. That's what we're typically referring to in the form of digital. And then engagement techniques, and I have in here examples of QR codes and NRC codes and different things like that. I'm actually going to show you some examples next week and walk you through a couple of case studies on how you can think about doing it a little bit differently to apply to your specific practices. But point of this column here is you can change the categories into something that you feel is more appropriate for you. Some of you might place an ad, say in a Good Health magazine or something like that, as an example. And you can certainly do that, right? You just have to be mindful of how much money you spend and what the potential alignment is with that ideal customer, right? So we did the Mad Libs exercise before this to try to understand who our ideal customer is. Now the trick with this exercise is to find the channels that will allow you to get to those customers, okay? So then going across this top row here, the way you would fill this out is what's the communication purpose, okay? And the communication purpose is like, what's our goal with putting this information out there? Is it just simply to create brand awareness, right? Last week we talked about a brand. And that's important, right? There's a lot of value to that. It doesn't necessarily directly and immediately equate to sales or getting clients to sign up for services that you're offering, but we're creating brand awareness, right? And it's very common to see that with companies that are very early stage, right? Hey, we're coming. This new great, therapy practice is coming, so be aware. And that you're building anticipation and those kinds of things. And that could be, your intentional purpose at the beginning. We also see that purpose with very large scale companies that are coming out with a new flavor of a product or a new, the next greatest, offering from some particular service. They're building anticipation around it. Okay. Then the goal is something that's very tangible, very concrete, right? It's this many customers, it's this many clicks on a website, it's this many, call to action items, whatever that happens to be. Setting appointments, right? For you as clients, say within your business, we want appointments set, right? And give it a tangible number. What's the goal? Okay. So it has to be really concrete, and that's the point I'm trying to stress there with the goal. And so then the question becomes, what's the action item? And the action item is, what is it that you're going to do in order to make that happen? So if I'm gonna say host a booth at an event, a health and wellness event, as an example, and I just want to have a booth there to talk about my services and make people aware of my brand. Okay, so you can add a category here that says, down here on this left, let's replace TV broadcasting with event, right? So we're just going to do that. What's the purpose? Let's call it brand awareness for the practice. That's not spelled right. Brand awareness for the practice. What's our goal? 10 new client visits. Okay, the action item are going to be, let's just bullet point it out, right? So maybe I will if I can figure out my format. Well, let's just do it like this. So what's the action items, right? I'm going to call the event planner, right? It doesn't like that. Oh, because I put equals there. Okay. I'm going to call the event planner. Ugh. There's a formula in here. Anyway, let's just go through the steps, right? I'm going to call an event planner. I'm going to make sure I have a table, and I'm going to have a tablecloth. So I'm going to get the items that I need in order to make sure I have a strong presence at that event, right? The business unit here in this particular case is always you. So this column right here is just you as the individual, because most of us on this call, you're a team of one typically, right? And so you're wearing a lot of hats. You're doing all the work yourself, and so it's going to be you. If you worked in a larger practice, say as an example, let's say you work for a larger firm, or like again Sarah's concept, and she's going to build a wellness space, right? And over time, Sarah's going to have more team members. She's going to have maybe enough people in-house to where she has a whole marketing division within that wellness practice, right? Or something along those lines. And so the business unit would be the group within the organization that's responsible for carrying that task forward. Most cases, for again, everybody on this call, it's going to be you. So just yourself is what we're putting here. Okay. Placement's going to be, where's this going to happen? So in this case with the event, it's going to happen at the county fairgrounds, or it's going to happen at the convention center, or it's going to happen, at some physical space, wherever that happens to be, right? So I'm just going to say fairgrounds for now. What's the timeline? It's a one-day event, right? It only happens that one day, Saturday, this coming Saturday, whatever the case happens to be. What's the cost of it? Well, they're going to give me a discount. It's going to be $500 to have the booth for the day. Okay. Some of them are free. Some of them cost much, much more than that. Okay. What's the measurement? Client visits, right? That's our goal. Okay. So so that's kind of how you go through this process here, right? I'm just kind of filling this out. Then let's talk about social media. So this row, typically what I'd like to see if you're going to use social media, almost everybody on this call, regardless of the age group that you're working with, should have some presence on social media. Because to the example I gave to Charlie earlier, you might be working with an aging population, but their family members, right? Typically their children are the ones that are helping drive the decisions when they reach a certain point. And they're on social media, right? They don't know where to go to seek some of the services that you're providing. And so they're seeking information in social media, okay, as an example. But what I want to focus on here when you do social media is I really want you to break this down, okay, and be very specific. So the two examples that I typically will give are Facebook and Instagram as an example, right? If you were to use those social media platforms, those are two separate platforms, and I want to see rows that are separate for each one of those. But then on top of that, not only do I want to see a row separate for Facebook, but I want to see at least 2 rows for Facebook. Because typically in social media, right, we're looking at things such as followers or likes, right? We want people to like something that we post, or we want them to follow us for content, right? And there are 2 very different things, and they have very different goals and very different purposes. Okay. So likes are great because that means whatever you posted, the world likes it. They're probably, 100 of their friends on social media are going to see that they liked it. So they're going to read it and say, oh, we like it too. And it's going to, have this huge ripple effect in a very positive way. Follows are much different, right? So when somebody follows you, that means they value you as a content leader. And when they follow you, that means anything that you post in the future will always reach that potential, that follower, and will reach the top of their feed. Now, if all they did was like it and they didn't follow you, then they might not see any future posts that you do. Just might be coincidence or luck, basically algorithms. If somebody in their network liked your post, and then they might see it as well. But followers, we have a lot more control over, right? And we can push messaging to them directly. We can capitalize on it in a bunch of different ways. Doesn't mean that likes are bad. It just means that we have to approach it differently. So normally what would happen in here is the communication purpose. This is why I want to see multiple rows, is you'd say, for this particular purpose, I want likes, right? I want to get 100 likes, whatever that happens to be. Okay. And we're going to kind of then do the same thing, a whole nother row. Shares is good too. Yeah, Margaret, thanks for that. Because it means that it's free marketing because they're pushing to other followers. That's absolutely a perfect example there. So we could do likes, we can do shares, we can do follows, and you should do them all separately so that it's clear what the purpose is, right? So for here, we're doing likes is our purpose. Our goal is 100 of them. Action item is maybe it's just simply going to say 1 post per day. Okay, that's the action item, right? Because it's a like or a follow. And so again, the business unit is you. Where's the placement? It's on Facebook. What's the timeline? Now for social media, I typically don't want to see it run longer than 7 days. And especially if it's just something for a like, it's probably 1 to 3 days, because you're not going to keep posting the same thing over and over again, but we're going to monitor its success for say 7 days max, because after then it's really lost any real traction there. It's typically going to be in that first 1 to 3 days. Okay. Now the cost here doesn't cost you anything to post something, right? So it's $0. And what's the measurement? How many likes do we get, right? So we have that kind of breakdown there. And so we do the same thing for follows, right? We do the same thing for forwards, for the example that Margaret gave us there about people that are forwarding it on and reposting it and doing those kinds of things. Now I put dollar amounts in here, but really what I want to see in this column is percentages. Okay, and this is why this works for your budget. So let's just put percentages in here, and we're going to call this 1% as an example. Now you can do ads in social media, you can do all that kind of stuff. Let's do. Okay, there's some formatting in this thing that's there it goes. Okay, so the goal here then is at the bottom of all of this is we want this column here to be 100%. Okay, so it doesn't matter the dollar amounts, it matters the percentages. This is why it works if you have a budget of $200 or you have a budget of $200,000, right? So it's just a percentage of that. And then what we're doing with this tool, so first of all, nothing you put on this sheet should ever take longer than 30 days, okay? This is really intended to be very short, right? We want to measure the success of what we're doing and how quickly we're getting the impact that we want. Because if it's not working, then we want to stop doing that, right? And so when you do social media, say ads as an example, now most of us, again, I just always caution people if this is not an area of strength for you. If it is and you enjoy doing it, fantastic, go out and do it. Anybody can learn how to create a social media post, create an ad, post it out there, decide what you want to spend. It's not difficult to do, but if you're not into design and trying to learn a new tool, just accept that and find somebody that's going to help you do that. Okay. But when you do social media ads, as an example, most marketing groups will do what they call A/B testing, right? So they're going to put together 2 ads, 2 images, 2 different phrases on the ads, 2 different offers, whatever that happens to be, and they're going to put it out in the ether for a couple of days and see what kind of interest they're getting. And then they're going to come back and they're going to look at that data and say, man, 90% of the people reacted to this image and only 10% of people actually reacted to this image over here. So let's go with image A. And then they'll go out there and they filter on the back end with social media. This is why social media is so powerful, is because you can, we just went through an exercise where we're trying to pick our ideal customer. We can use social media to make sure only our ideal customer is the one who's seeing that ad, which is very effective for what we're trying to do. And it's very cost effective, right? And versus like a television ad as an example, which is very expensive to do. And it's literally seen by millions of people in many cases, if you're going to run an ad, which is great. Because it has a very broad reach, but it's too expensive to do high frequency, right? So we don't typically do it over and over again. And we don't really have a way to control the audience that's seeing it because it's a very broad audience and it's not necessarily just our ideal customer. And so that's why it's not as cost effective. But real world example, when COVID hit, so in March of 2020, I had units in production for my business and I kind of went into a panic mode for a little bit. And I was like, man, I'm not going to get product here. And I have this whole great summer of activities and events and, different marketing strategies planned to really move this business forward. What can I do? Because, this COVID thing's probably just going to blow over in a couple of days, right? So I did a pre-order campaign on Instagram. And basically what I did is I put together a small ad with some word on it, we're the #1 pet cooling vests. Click on the ad, go to my website, you get a 10% discount, right? And it's a pre-order because you're the first to respond, you're going to get pre-orders, right? Yeah. Okay, good. Yeah, Maria, I'm going to get to that in just a second. So good examples. So I did this pre-order campaign, and because I went through the exercise that we did earlier with the Mad Libs thing, and I had this great picture of who my customer is, I plugged in all that criteria on the back end. They're just literally like radio buttons, like the type of person that you want to see your ad typically reads these magazines, click that radio box. The type of person that you want to see your ads typically falls within this demographic range, click that ad, And so that way, when I spend my money, it's only going, social media platform is driving it to those specific customers. So I know my conversion rate will be high. And I said, let's just start out small. I'm going to do $25 a day on Instagram with this ad for a pre-order campaign, right? You're first to market. If you click and you buy now, you're going to get a discount and you're going to be the first to get this cool product. And within 7 days, I oversold all the inventory that I had in production. So I had to turn it off. Like, it was that effective because we were able to really hone in on who the exact customer was. And that's why it's so powerful in that way. So just something for you to think about. So Marie, I don't know if Kanita, if you're still available, can we free up Marie's microphone?
Yes, just give me 1 second.
Sure. And Marie, if you're open to talking a little bit and sharing with us, that'd be fantastic. And you were told to boost something. It's mostly bots. Do you agree with that? Yeah. Yes, I'm not a fan of boosting. Boosting is simply just something that typically comes from the social media platform themselves. That's there. It's just a way for them to kind of squeeze an extra $5 out of you, or whatever, whatever the dollar amount is that you're spending. That's typically how it works, right? Like, hey, give me an extra $5 and we'll boost it. But what they're doing is they're boosting it. I believe that they are really boosting it, but they're boosting it to audiences that aren't your ideal customer. And so that's typically why I don't encourage that. Boosting is not, it's not targeted in that way. So Marie, you want to share?
Hi, yes. Hi. Yeah. So again, I do a lot of marketing, both on my Facebook page and my Instagram account, and TikTok, by the way.
Okay.
TikTok is starting to kind of perk a lot of people's attention. But yeah, so maybe I'm framing the boosted question wrong or whatever, but I've created both an ad and boosted, and even when I boost it, like, it says what's your target audience, yada yada. It's similar to the ads. But I hear a lot of feedback when I talk to other providers or just people who market on Instagram or Facebook, share about how when you do that, like, if there's like apparently, and I am not educated on this, so I don't know, that's why I'm kind of curious, like bots or AI accounts that are just liking and following and messaging, but it's really not an individual or somebody that might actually translate into becoming a client.
Yeah.
And I could kind of see some like, I even will get like messages, like, because you can decide what is your purpose of your advertisement or your boost. Like, do you want more messages? Do you want more likes? Stuff like that. And if you click on like more messages, then you have people messaging you, but then when you respond, they don't respond back ever,
Yeah.
And so I'm just curious if you have any insight on, like artificial intelligence, when you do spend the money on like social media, and is there any data that like they're real, they're not?
Yeah, it's an excellent point. And if anybody on the call is not super familiar with this, again, in the world of social media, there's all these, likes and follows and forwards and, the shares and those kinds of things. Those are all good things. To what you're saying, Marie, I have not seen it happen as frequently from the platform itself, right? So if Facebook or Instagram or TikTok says, hey, we'll boost this for you, and it's coming from them, I don't see that it typically goes to bots, but that doesn't mean it doesn't happen, right? I don't think Facebook, as an example, is the one that's intentionally pushing you to bots. I think there's a lot of bots out there that just meet that criteria. Because you said, hey, these are my criteria and this is my ideal customer kind of thing. And so there's ones that do that. There are a ton, and this is something that you have to be aware of as an early entrepreneur. There's a ton of private groups out there that will reach out to you instantaneously once you start to build online presence and say, hey, we can boost your followers, for $50 or whatever. Like they'll put some pretty nominal fee into it. And you're like, sure, I could do that. And within like, once you pay the money, within minutes, you'll get tons of followers, and they're all these fake bots. And
Okay.
so the company that sold you on that concept is like, hey, see, we did it. And then 2 days later, all those followers fell off your account, right? Because they're not real accounts. They're not real people. There's all these like weird kind of what they call bot farms, typically overseas, where there are people, they're physical people like managing thousands and thousands of these fake accounts to just kind of make it look like you get this initial hit for that, but there's no real value in it, because it's a hard thing to do, to be disciplined with that and just kind of pay attention to that from the new entrepreneur side, because having more followers, as an example, in your social media is very, very powerful, right? It allows you to kind of leverage any agreements or partnerships that you're trying to form with other, like partners or things like that. And it's important for you to have really strong followers, but having followers that are not real accounts is not benefiting you, and it's not benefiting anybody that you're trying to partner with. So the short answer, Marie, is I normally see that from private parties. I don't see it as frequently from the platform itself.
What you're describing, would it be like when I post on Instagram,
Mhm.
I'll have like comments, like you're a perfect fit for our brand ambassador. Is
Mhm.
that kind of what you're saying? Those people that say you're a great brand ambassador, please reach out. Is that the
Yeah, I
same?
mean, there's so much scamming that happens out there. I mean, the concept of a brand ambassador is supposed to be that so when you're posting in social media, Marie, can you tell me a little bit about your business or your area of focus?
So I provide equine assisted psychotherapy and equine assisted learning.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So for something like what you're doing, right? If somebody has genuine intentions, they're looking at your account and saying, wow, this is a thought leader in the space, right? So this is somebody they have content that they're putting out there. And normally this is the part too with social media that a lot of people don't understand is you really want to use social media to build relationships, right? So you don't typically want to, like, on your actual account in your postings say, hey, come buy our product, or hey, come sign up for our service. What you want to put out there is content, right? Like, here's how equine therapy can solve these problems,
Right.
right? As a subject matter expert, like, hey, here's a really cool research study that talks about how equine therapy is really making some big waves in the industry, different things like that. And from that, you should get genuine followers, right? Like, hey, I want to go to Marie's site first for content because they're a subject matter expert and I trust what Marie says. And so when and if that's the case and you're building up followers, you'll get people to say, hey, you could be a brand ambassador. This is where the power of having followers comes in, because you have everybody's ear, if you will, as far as you being the content expert. So a brand ambassador, a genuine effort towards a brand ambassador would say, hey, we want you to put these equine products on your horses that you're showing in pictures in your posts with clients that you work with, right? So maybe it's new bridles and saddles and things like that. And for you, typically, I would assume that maybe that's not of interest to you because you're not selling products. You're not necessarily trying to push that kind of thing in the space. You're more about the therapy aspect of it.
Yeah, that sounds like a nightmare.
Yeah, right. So you have to stay in alignment with what you're doing. And oftentimes people will fail from that because the second that you start trying to sell products on your account that drew people in because you were a subject matter expert, you start to lose some of those followers.
Right.
Because it's not in alignment there. But there are people that will constantly reach out to you and make it sound like it's a really good deal for you for this and that and the other. You just have to be really careful about it. So what I would say is always stick to things that are in alignment with your why. So remember a few weeks ago, we talked about the why of what the business is that you're doing. And if somebody says, to you, I'm trying to make this up, so it might not come out perfect here, Marie, but if somebody said, hey, you want to be a brand ambassador for this thing that's,
Fly spray.
with what?
Fly spray for horses or something.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Fly spray, right? That's probably not in alignment with the why behind your business itself. Right. And while I'm certain that you're probably an avid, horse lover and things of that, your business itself is not pushing that aspect of it. Right. You're working on the therapy itself of, being around the animals and what they can actually do for humans. So fly spray is probably not something that's necessarily in line with what you're trying to do.
I think like if going back to like just thinking about who does post that, it's mostly like other Instagram pages that are like mental health, mental wellness stuff. I've always just kind of ignored them because I feel like you don't know me. This random page is like messaging me to be their brand ambassador, and it just seemed so fake because they don't even like, they haven't built that relationship.
Yeah.
And how do they know I won't run their stuff to the ground or something?
Yeah.
So it didn't have a lot of value in it. But yeah, Facebook and Instagram is like, Instagram, I get a lot of traffic coming in through that, and I love that, but it's exhausting posting 2 to 3 times a day, and it takes a huge toll on my mental health.
Yeah, I agree with you 100%. I always jokingly say that I know my business has made it when I don't have to pay attention to the website or the social media account. That's because we're in a spot where somebody else is getting paid to do that. So it's very time consuming. And once you start doing it, you realize why there's people that have full-time jobs that do that. Because to your point, you have to be consistent with it. You can't just post stuff randomly, right? Because again, if you want followers and you want people to put you at the top of their feed, they're looking to you for daily content. And you have to be consistent with it. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Marie. There's some things that you can do. It's really fairly easy to get unpaid interns from the local colleges and universities because they need hours to complete their degree. Typically, the challenge with working with interns is you have to be very, very, very clear with them what you want from them. Otherwise, they end up taking up more of your time than if you just posted the stuff yourself. So, so you just
have some interns. I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
One more quick question and I'll be done. But just on the subject matter is like, and one of the driving reasons why I chose to sign up for this is I get, like I said, a lot of traffic comes in through seeing my social media posts.
Great.
Is it the trend now? Like, should I stop complaining so much? And is this where marketing's going? Do we have to, is social media, Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, is that our number one focus for marketing now? Or do we still have higher strategies like the newspaper, billboard, or what are your thoughts? And then I'll be done asking questions.
I think it's a good question, right? I mean, social media is the obvious choice, especially for early stage entrepreneurs, because it's so cost effective and it's so powerful, right? I mean, you can really dial in who your ideal customer is, and cost you hardly any money to be effective in that space. Does that mean it should be your only channel? Absolutely not. You should always be working towards other strategies. And that's kind of how my lecture on this particular tool that we're talking about right now, this IMC chart, kind of works, is because the goal with all of this, and you'll hear me say pretty frequently to early stage companies, is you have to do a lot of everything in the beginning until you start to figure out what sticks, right? And then once you find out what's sticking, then you shift more of your focus on that. And that's why I created this tool, primarily because of this timeline piece, right? Because I see early stage entrepreneurs all the time just say, well, I just spend $25 a day or, $500 a month. in social media ads. And I'm like, okay, cool. But is it working? Do you know if it's working? I don't know. I just keep paying $500 a month, right? And that's not a good thing. So you want to make sure that you understand what works. And there might be things, so Marie, like in your business example, there's probably some real opportunity for you to have, say, an ad placement in an equine related magazine, right? Or a health and wellness magazine, right? That specializes in alternative methods, say, as an example, right? And you need to try a bunch of those out to figure out what's working and what's not working. And when you do those ads, as an example, and I was going to talk about that here anyway. So, like a newspaper or magazine here, when you do those ads, you want to make sure that each ad has its own specific code, right? So typically, to create that call to action and have motivate customers to come sign up for, a free consultation on your website or whatever you're doing to see if equine therapy is a good fit for them. You put a code in there, right? So, hey, come to the site, get a 10% discount, get a free consultation plus 10% off your first client visit, use code equine monthly, or something like that, so that you know where those people came from. The discount for you is, relatively insignificant from a revenue standpoint for you to understand and track that difference. So that part, I think, is really important for you to do. And you'll find, like I can go back on my website and I can look at all the different discount codes and different things that I've done, and I can see the ones that are effective, right? And so sometimes a smaller publication, it's cheaper to place an ad in it, and it's more focused directly on what it is that you're doing. So you're going to have a higher conversion rate. And, so I have an ad as an example that runs in AKC magazine, and I get a ton of sales from that ad. And it cost me about $1,500. It's not super expensive. It's not the cheapest thing that I do, but it's not super, but I definitely get my money back from the sales of that. I could spend $2,000 in a totally different magazine and have zero sales. And so it's just a matter of kind of understanding who that audience is. And that's the point of this tool. Do I think that everybody should be in social media? Absolutely. Do I think that everybody needs to make it their primary channel? No. Do I think that everybody needs to do what Marie's done, but sounds like with some success, be the person who's constantly managing it on a regular basis? No. Because you want to stay focused on your business, but you have to do some of that stuff in the beginning to gain traction. And I do firmly believe that everybody needs to be on social media. Again, some people will always say, well, my population of people that I work with is way older, so they don't use social media. Well, I would challenge that. So the largest population on Facebook these days is actually the older population. But more importantly, understanding again who's really driving those decisions within that family dynamic. Is it the adult parents that are driving that decision? And I can guarantee you they're on Facebook, right? Or these other social media platforms. And I like that Marie brought up TikTok, which I do think is starting to gain a lot more traction from people. And so you just have to do that. But and maybe it's not even your intended purpose to make that your primary channel to drive customers to your website, but it builds credibility. So I'll give you an example. So I have a presence on Amazon. I use a third-party group. They do a terrible job, and I'm perfectly fine with that, right? Because what'll happen is people will go to my website from all these different marketing strategies that I do. They go to my website and they're like, wow, this thing's cool. It's got good reviews on the website. I wonder if they sell it on Amazon. And they go to Amazon, not necessarily so they can buy it, because then they want to see if people have purchased it through Amazon and provided reviews for it. And if I have good reviews on Amazon, people will actually make the effort to go back to my website and purchase direct from my website. So that's the whole reason why I do it. Do I want to sell product on Amazon? Not really, but I have to have that presence there. So it gives me some credibility in that space. And so, think about that with, again, all of the things that most of you do, especially in the therapy world, in the health and wellness world, that those circles are relatively small, right? When you really get down to it, especially if many of you are specialized in a certain area, where you can probably name the top 5 equine therapists in the country, right? I mean, it's that small. And that's something just for you to kind of be present, always be present in those spaces and in those small little circles, so that it builds credibility for you across the space. But be mindful of the time that it takes you to do that. So those are great questions, Marie, and I appreciate the comments from everybody today. I'm going to pause for just a minute here and see if there's any other questions from anybody else in regards to any of the stuff we've covered so far today. Okay. Well, if you have questions, please type them in the chat, and if we need to free up your microphone, we can do that as well. Where can you download copies of these materials, Charlie? I'm going to put them in your shared drive. Hopefully, you have access to that drive. If you don't know what I'm talking about, or you haven't been into the Google Drive yet, feel free to type your email address in the chat, and I'll copy it, and I'll make sure that you're added to it. Today. But all the materials that we cover in this class are in a shared drive, and they're broken down by week. So you'll be able to go in there and you can see all the tools, and you can, download and redo these templates that I've put together for you here as many times as you want, and go through those exercises. So Charlie, I thank you for the email address there. I'll make sure that you have access to it. You'll also see in there, Charlie, if you haven't been with us in the previous weeks, you'll have access to the recorded sessions, so you can go back and you can watch any of the sessions that you might have missed, as well as all the materials in there. Videos that I share, those kinds of things are all in that drive as well. Okay, good. Sarah, good. I see yours, and I'll put it in there too. Do you have any resources for worth your time classes focusing on social media marketing? Yeah, it's a good question, Marie. So there's some really good tools, and I'll put something together in like a Word document that has a bunch of links to different resources. So there's a couple of good things. So locally here in Denver, we have something called the Commons on Champa, which is free co-working space. And through the Commons on Champa, we offer something called Power Hours. And Power Hours are basically classes that are put on by subject matter experts in a particular field. Marketing is one that's very common, legal, a variety of others. And you can go on, and since COVID hit, we've kind of converted a lot of those to virtual formats. So you can go on there and you can see if there's any topics that are being provided locally. And when I say local, there's still most of them being offered virtually. I'm going to send you a link to another group called Hello Alice that puts on a ton of free content. And it was like Energize Colorado was created in the wake of COVID to help support early stage entrepreneurs. And they've partnered with some really large organizations, big, national firms that provide some really cool short video contents and things like that in regards to cool techniques and strategies around social media, as an example. So they have a variety of different topics there. I would highly look into the resources provided through Energize Colorado. So they have a huge mentor network, and you can go on there and request to be paired up with a mentor and advisor on a specific topic. And so as advisors, mentors, we've put kind of a short bio and a background of where our expertise is, and you could potentially be aligned to people that are doing that and experts in that space. So there's a handful. There's another one that I'll put on there is a one that I really like. It's called Marketing Profs, like short for professor, marketingprofs.com. It's a super cool site. There's really short articles in there that will highlight some really cool techniques and like kind of, really innovative approaches to doing certain things, especially around marketing. And there's a whole category for digital and social media. and just, you can, the articles are probably 500 words, and you can just skim through them and be like, oh, that's a cool idea. I didn't think about doing that. So there's some fun techniques to do that. The challenge, I get super passionate about talking about marketing, especially social media marketing, from a strategy standpoint and a big picture, and how it can be really effective for the work that you do. The challenge is the implementation part, right? So I can sit down with a marketing firm as an example that I want to hire for my business, and I can say, this is the whole roadmap for the year. This is what I want you to do. And they can go out and implement it. If I took that same roadmap that I created for myself, it would take me 10 times longer to implement it than paying somebody else to do it. So there's just always that balance, right, between paying somebody to do it and doing that. And again, the prices can vary when you're hiring somebody from outside, right? If you're hiring a firm to do that, you should expect to spend some money to have some real effect, right? So typically we don't see sustainable traction, if you will, in social media, as an example, till about 3 or 4 months of exposure. So we have to get it out there consistently on a regular basis to really start to drive traffic. And I don't know, Marie, from your experience, it sounds like you've been doing it from the beginning, and it sounds like now you have a lot of traction, but I'm sure it took you several months to get there before you really start to see some of those results come in. Most marketing firms, you're going to hire for social media and things like that, you're probably looking somewhere between $1,500 and $2,500 a month minimum for 4 months, right? To start to see some traction, and then you can start to assess, what's working, what's not working, and should you stick with it. And so those are things that I normally encourage people just to kind of pay attention to. You can get firms that will tell you they cost $10,000 a month. And I think some of that stuff the price of it gets out of hand pretty quickly. So just be mindful there. But what I find is probably the most effective is really staying close to the network that you're part of. Because being in that network is going to help you kind of learn best practices, learn what other people are doing, but your colleagues in that space are going to be your biggest referral source. Okay. And so that's something for you to keep in mind, because as many of you, especially as healthcare professionals, right, you have an area of specialization. I really work well with this population that are focused on these types of things, but you constantly get referrals or word of mouth referrals that come into your office that say, can you help me with this? No, I can't, but Marie in our network can. So let me give you their contact information. So stay close to that network. Are there small business grants for marketing in Colorado? So in the state of Colorado, so the state of Colorado puts out grants that they call, the ones that are most popular, that they do most frequently, are called advanced industries grants. And those grants are kind of geared towards businesses that have the potential to kind of set up, manufacturing facilities, tech-related platforms, things like that, things that will create lots of jobs there. They don't typically allow them to be used for marketing expense. Although what I would say to you is hang tight.